On a stormy morning, a determined young black woman was on her way to the most important job interview of her life. Just a few blocks from the bus stop, she suddenly saw her elderly neighbor collapsed in the rain. Without a moment's hesitation, she rushed to help and missed her bus. But she didn't give up. Soaked and running late, she still walked into the interview room. Her effort caught the eye of the company's CEO, and what happened next will change her life forever. Everyone turned when the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. The lobby of Wheelcroft Holdings, sleek, modern, and cold as a glass sculpture, fell into an abrupt hush. Malaya James stepped out, and the stillness deepened, thick as fog. She was 26, a recent graduate from Eastlake Community College, the first in her family to earn a degree. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment she shared with her younger cousin, worked night shifts at a diner 3 blocks from home, and had printed her resume that very morning at the public library using free credits she'd earned by tutoring high school kids after hours. She didn't have a car, but she had a dream, and something she held closer than luck: grit. Now she stood in the lobby of one of the most prestigious investment firms in Brighton Hills, drenched and disheveled. Her dark curls were matted to her cheeks, her once cream blouse clung to her shoulders, and her skirt, once carefully ironed, was streaked with fresh mud from the knees down. Her flats, once beige and neat, squelched with every step on the polished marble, leaving behind smudged footprints that stood out like stains on crystal. The contrast was brutal. Around her the room gleamed, suits pressed, shoes polished, voices clipped and composed. This lobby was not made for people who came in with dirt on their heels and water dripping from their sleeves. One man near the coffee station muttered under his breath, chuckling. A woman whispered something into her phone and turned away. 2 security guards leaned in with subtle tension, one already checking his tablet, likely to verify whether this soggy young woman had any business being here. But Malaya didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She didn't shrink. Instead, she walked forward, slowly, deliberately, her shoulders straight despite the cold of her soaked clothes and the burn of judgment in the air. She clutched a thin plastic folder to her chest, its edges warped by the rain. The papers inside were damp and slightly curled, but she held them as if they were gold, and to her they were pages that carried the weight of early mornings, missed sleep, and sacrifices made quietly, without applause. She approached the front desk where a young receptionist, polished and startled, looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone caught between professionalism and disbelief. Malaya nodded. "I'm here for the associate analyst interview, Malaya James." She didn't offer excuses, didn't explain the mud or the rain. Just her name, spoken clear and steady, as though it carried the gravity of everything she'd endured to be here. The receptionist blinked, eyes darting down to her screen, then back to Malaya, her lips parting as if to say something else, but she didn't. "Floor 39, Conference Room B," she finally said, and slid a temporary badge across the desk. She avoided touching Malaya's hand. Malaya took the badge and turned back toward the elevator bank. A security guard still watched her, brows furrowed, but didn't move. Her shoes squelched as she crossed the marble, each step a testament to the path she had chosen not to abandon. As the elevator opened and she stepped inside, her reflection shimmered back at her in the mirrored wall. Wet, tired, underdressed, but standing, present, unshaken. She pressed the button for the 39th floor with a trembling hand. Her stomach knotted, her pulse echoed in her ears, but her eyes, though rimmed with fatigue, were focused. She had arrived. Not in the way she had planned, but perhaps in the way that mattered most. Not as a perfect candidate, but as a real one. And sometimes the truth was messier than a resume. But it was stronger. It endured, and it walked in even when no one expected it to. The elevator doors closed with a soft click, sealing Malaya inside a quiet, reflective chamber of glass and brushed steel. As the car began its smooth ascent to the 39th floor, she allowed herself a single deep breath, the first she'd taken since she stepped out into the storm that morning. Her fingers tightened around the folder clutched to her chest, her knuckles white with cold and resolve. She glanced down at herself, At the damp blouse clinging uncomfortably to her skin, at the muddy edges of her skirt where the dried fabric had begun to stiffen, and for a moment doubt tried to slip through a crack in her armor. But she shut it out, just like she had the 100 times it came knocking before. When the electricity got cut off last winter, when her mother got laid off, when every rejection email tried to convince her that maybe people like her just didn't belong in places like this. But that morning she had made a decision. She wasn't going to let the world decide her worth. Not today. She'd woken up at 4:30 a.m. before the city lights even flickered out. Her cousin still slept on the pull-out mattress in the living room, the small space they shared quiet except for the sound of rain pattering against the single-pane window. Malaya had laid out her clothes the night before. A pressed cream blouse, a navy skirt, the nicest shoes she owned, and spent 20 minutes taming her curls into a soft updo that wouldn't draw too much attention but still made her feel like herself. Her resume, newly printed and still warm from the library printer the day before, had been carefully slid into a plastic sleeve, sealed against the forecasted downpour. She had just enough on her transit card to make it to Brighton Hills and back, provided no detours or delays ruined the timing. She couldn't afford a mistake. But life, she had learned, didn't always wait for your timing. She was just 3 blocks from the bus stop when she saw him. Mr. Frederick, her elderly neighbor who used a cane and always tipped her $5 extra when she brought up his groceries. He had slipped near the curb, the water rising around him in waves that crept toward the sidewalk like fingers. His thin coat was soaked through, his hat had rolled off into the gutter. And no one stopped. Cars honked, a cyclist swerved. People passed him by like a fallen tree branch. But Malaya didn't. Without thinking, she tossed her umbrella aside, it had already flipped backward twice in the wind, and hurried toward him, kneeling on the cold, wet sidewalk without hesitation. "Mr. Frederick, are you okay?" she asked, gently reaching for his arm. He looked up at her, dazed, glasses fogged, rain streaking down his cheeks like tears, and nodded faintly. "Slipped. Damn curb's a trap," he muttered, voice weak but still edged with that dry humor she loved. "I tried to catch my bag and caught the sidewalk instead." Malaya smiled softly, even as the rain soaked through her blouse and ran down her spine like ice. "Let's get you up, okay?" she said. It took effort. His knees were stiff, her shoes had no grip. But after a few moments of steady pulling and soft reassurance, he was standing again. She gathered his scattered bottles, tucked his bag under her arm, and walked him slowly back toward his porch just 2 doors down. One step at a time. Each moment ticked louder in her mind. She could hear the rumble of the approaching bus. She knew the timing, knew what this meant. Once he was safe inside and seated on the floral couch near the front window, wrapped in a dry blanket, he squeezed her hand. "You didn't have to stop, you know," he said. "Most wouldn't have." She knelt beside him, catching her breath. "That's the problem, isn't it?" she replied, wiping her forehead with her sleeve. "Most don't. But that's not who I want to be." He looked at her for a long moment. "You got somewhere important to be, don't you?" She nodded. "Interview. Big one." He glanced at the clock, then at her mud-speckled skirt and damp folder. "Well," he said, eyes warm, "you already passed one test this morning. Let's hope they're smart enough to see it." She rose slowly, her knees aching from the cold, and offered him one last smile. Then she turned and ran. On the sidewalk slick with oil and rain, past intersections where light cycles betrayed her, past construction fences plastered with yellow signs screaming danger, hard hat area. She ducked through an opening in one, the only chance she had of shaving minutes off the trip. Her shoes slipped almost immediately on the uneven ground. She tried to catch herself, stumbled, and hit the mud hard. A sickening squelch echoed as she fell. Her skirt caught the worst of it, dragging through thick sludge, her hands sinking into clay-like muck. For a moment she sat there, stunned. The cold seeped into her skin. Her resume folder lay just inches away, miraculously closed, splattered but intact. Most people would have gone home then, changed, rescheduled, apologized, and promised to try again. But Malaya had no other interview, no second suit, no room to try again. This was the chance, not one of many, just the one. She stood, shivering, soaked. Her calves burned from the run, her elbows stung from the fall, but she stood. She picked up her folder, wiped her hands on her skirt, and kept moving. As the elevator reached the 39th floor and the doors opened with a subdued ding, Malaya stepped out into a hallway of soft lighting and silence. The floor beneath her was plush carpet now, muffling her steps. She didn't know yet what waited in the glass-walled conference room at the end of the hall, but she knew this. She had run through storms for this, helped a man when no one else would, fallen face first, and gotten up anyway. She had earned her seat, not through connections, not through appearances, but through character, through the choices no one saw. She adjusted her folder and walked forward, heart pounding. Whatever was waiting beyond those doors, she was ready. Not because she looked the part, but because she had lived it. The double-glass doors to Conference Room B stood ajar, just wide enough to glimpse a long mahogany table gleaming beneath recessed lighting, surrounded by high-backed chairs filled with crisp silhouettes. Malaya paused for only a second before pushing them open, her fingers still slick from the rain. Conversation faltered mid-sentence as she stepped inside. 15 heads turned in unison. Sharp suits, perfect makeup, pristine shoes resting on clean carpet. It was like walking into a photograph. The air was cool, scented faintly of lavender and polished wood, but it was the silence that bit into her most, not the cold. She moved forward slowly, aware of every detail. The mud still clinging to the hem of her skirt, the sound her soggy shoes made with each step, the chill clinging to her sleeves. She felt it all, but didn't let it slow her. She scanned the room quickly. 3 interviewers seated at the head of the table, a woman in navy with a stern expression and a clipboard, a man in glasses already flipping through a resume, and at the center, an older man with silver hair, hands steepled beneath his chin, watching her with unreadable calm. Candidates lined both sides of the table. 8 men, 5 women. Every one of them dry, composed, glossy like a magazine spread. Avery Trent was the first to react. With a smirk tugging at his mouth, he leaned back in his seat, arms folded across his Armani suit. "Guess the storm hit some of us harder than others," he muttered, just loud enough. A few low chuckles followed, restrained but cruel. Layla Jung, seated beside him, shot him a disapproving glance, then looked away from Malaya quickly, pretending not to stare. Another man down the table shifted in his seat, glancing at her shoes, then back to his tablet, expression stiff. Malaya didn't respond. She didn't slow. She walked with careful steps and sat down at the only remaining seat. At the farthest end of the table, directly under the AC vent, where no one else had wanted to sit. It was colder here, but she sat tall. She placed her damp folder gently on the table before her, smoothed her skirt, and folded her hands in her lap. The interviewers murmured something between themselves. One of them, the woman with the clipboard, cleared her throat. "We'll begin with brief introductions," she said, voice clipped, already flipping to the next page in her folder. One by one the candidates spoke, each voice measured and confident, rehearsed to perfection. Stanford. Columbia. 4 years at Deloitte. 2 summers with McKinsey, a minor in behavioral economics, a startup exit at 23. The numbers glinted like metals on their resumes. Then it was Malaya's turn. She stood. She didn't rush. Didn't launch into a sales pitch. She didn't recite her GPA, though it had been high. She didn't mention that she worked 40 hours a week while taking a full course load. She didn't bring up the scholarships she won, the tutoring center she volunteered at, or the nights she stayed awake stitching together hope from textbooks and shift schedules. She just looked straight ahead, her voice steady and quiet. "My name is Malaya James," she said. "I know I don't look like everyone else in this room right now, but I believe that what I walked through to get here matters more than what I look like sitting in this chair." The room froze. Even Avery's smirk faded. She didn't break eye contact with the panel. "This morning I helped someone who'd fallen, and I missed my bus. I ran through a construction site to make up time. I slipped. I got up. I kept going. Because I didn't come here to be perfect. I came here to prove I belong." Silence held the room in its grip. Not out of awkwardness, but impact. One of the interviewers blinked, his pen paused mid-note. Layla lowered her eyes. Across the table, someone slowly closed their laptop. The woman with the clipboard didn't look up, but her pen twitched once, sharply. At the head of the table, the man with silver hair leaned back slightly in his chair. He hadn't taken his eyes off Malaya since she walked in, now his hands lowered to the table, his fingers tapping once, slowly. He said nothing, but his gaze lingered, not with judgment but with something else. Memory, recognition. The kind of look that says, "I've been where you are. I remember." Malaya sat again, her hands trembling slightly beneath the table, but her eyes steady. The dampness on her clothes still clung, the mud hadn't vanished, and she didn't expect it to, but something had shifted. The laughter had stopped. The whispers had faded. She wasn't just the muddy girl who'd walked into a room of giants. She had spoken, and they had listened. The silence that followed Malaya's words lingered in the room like mist, quiet but thick with something unspoken. No one moved. No one laughed. The notes stopped. The tapping of pens, the swiping of tablets, the sideways glances, they all ceased, and in that rare stillness, the man at the head of the table, the one with silver hair and a demeanor carved from decades of decisions, finally leaned forward. Lionel Beckett, CEO and co-founder of Willcroft Holdings, rested his elbows on the polished wood, steepling his fingers once more as his eyes stayed on Malaya. Then, in a voice low and steady, he spoke. 30 years ago, he said, and just that was enough to draw the room's attention. Even Avery Trent shifted upright, surprised. I walked into an interview at Hanover Trust covered in engine grease. The words landed like a whisper in a cathedral. He didn't blink. His tone wasn't performative, wasn't warm or dramatic. It was just honest, and that made it powerful. I'd spent the night working a double shift at my uncle's garage because my mom had just lost her job and we needed to make rent. I didn't have time to go home. I washed my hands in the utility sink behind the building, put on a tie over a stained t-shirt and walked in anyway. He paused, his eyes still on Malaya, though now they flickered, just briefly, to the mud-stained edge of her skirt, to the folder she had pressed so carefully against the table. The receptionist told me to come back when I was presentable. His mouth curled at the memory, not in bitterness but in clarity. But one man in that office, just one, asked me to sit, asked me to explain who I was, what I wanted. He gave me 10 minutes. That 10 minutes changed my life. The air in the room seemed to shift again, softer now, like someone had opened a window none of them could see. Lionel sat back slowly, clasping his hands in front of him. I see a lot of polish in this room, he continued, now scanning the candidates lined up on either side of the table. Impressive resumes, impressive stories, and that's good, we want excellence. His voice dropped half a tone, firm now. But polish doesn't teach you how to stand up after being knocked down. It doesn't show me what you'll do when things go wrong. When the market turns, when the client walks away, when the plan falls apart and all you have is grit. His gaze returned to Malaya. I see grit. She didn't smile. She didn't cry, but her shoulders eased, just a little, and she met his eyes not with defiance but with something deeper. Gratitude, yes. Relief, maybe. But mostly conviction. The kind that came not from being chosen, but from knowing you earned your seat. I see someone, Lionel said, who didn't let mud or judgment or circumstance keep her from walking through that door. And that, he turned toward the other interviewers, then toward the candidates at the table, his voice louder now, commanding, is the kind of person I want in this company. For a moment no one moved. Then the woman with the clipboard straightened, her lips parted but silent. The man beside her, glasses still perched on the bridge of his nose, scribbled something quickly on a legal pad, though what it was no one could see. Layla Jung looked down, her jaw tightening, not in anger but in shame, perhaps, or reflection. Avery Trent stared ahead, unreadable for once. Malaya said nothing. She didn't have to. The room had already spoken, and not just in words. Outside, the rain had begun to ease, the sky softening to gray. But inside, Conference Room B, something else had shifted. A paradigm, a perception. The brittle veneer of expectations cracking to reveal something far more valuable underneath. Character. Courage. and the quiet, undeniable strength of a woman who showed up anyway. Weeks later, the lobby of Willcroft Holdings looked the same: immaculate marble floors, polished steel fixtures, and a gentle hum of ambition flowing beneath every quiet footstep. But something about the place had changed, subtly, almost invisibly, like the way light bends slightly after a storm. At the heart of the 18th floor, in a glass-walled meeting room where ideas moved faster than time, stood Malaya James. No longer the woman with mud on her skirt and rain in her eyes. She stood straight, confident, composed, wearing a navy blazer that fit her like purpose, her curls pulled back, her voice steady and sharp as she led the weekly strategy briefing for junior analysts. Her laptop was open, her notes crisp, but it was her presence that commanded the room. Not because she demanded attention, but because she had earned respect. Around the table sat some of the same faces from the interview that day, now no longer smirking or posturing. They listened, not out of formality, but because they had seen what she could do, how quickly she adapted, how she worked late when no one asked, how her ideas weren't just insightful but practical, grounded in the kind of clarity that comes from living close to the edge of the line. Even Layla Jung, now 2 desks down from her on the analytics team, glanced over with a quiet nod when Malaya paused to invite questions. There was no tension in it, just recognition. They weren't rivals, not anymore. Outside the room, Lionel Beckett stood watching from the corridor, one hand in his pocket, a slight smile forming beneath his graying beard. He wasn't in the habit of checking on interns, but today he had made an exception, not because he doubted her, but because he wanted to witness the full arc of a decision that had reminded him why he built the company in the first place. Willcroft Holdings didn't need more polish, it needed people who knew how to rise. Later that afternoon, in the small, crowded break room tucked beside the west stairwell, a new intern spilled her coffee, just a little too full, just a little too nervous, the lid giving way as it hit the countertop. Papers scattered, coffee splashed across the table and onto her shirt, and for a second she froze, flushed, overwhelmed, humiliated. A few people looked up, then quickly looked away. She started gathering her things with shaking hands, lips pressed tight to hold back tears. That's when Malaya stepped in. She knelt without hesitation, grabbed a handful of napkins, and began blotting the coffee from the desk, her voice calm, easy, without a hint of judgment. "Don't worry," she said softly, offering a small, knowing smile. "We all have our moments." The intern looked at her. Malaya James, the one whose name had started coming up in meetings, the one Beckett quoted last week in a leadership memo. And blinked, startled by the kindness. Malaya handed her a clean napkin, stood, and added with a wink, "My first day here I tracked mud across the marble floors. Real mud. Still got the job." The girl laughed, just once, quietly but gratefully. And just like that, it clicked. Malaya hadn't just gotten through the door. She had changed the way the people inside looked at the ones still waiting outside. She reminded them that greatness didn't always walk in with a spotless suit or a glowing reference. Sometimes it arrived soaked, trembling, late, but unbroken. Sometimes it was the person with the messiest first impression who had the most to offer. By the end of the day, the break room was back to normal, the meeting room cleared, and the office lights beginning to dim. Malaya stood by the window, watching the last flickers of daylight dance across the city skyline. Below, the same streets stretched out in every direction, messy, unpredictable, real. And somewhere out there, maybe another girl was running through the rain with a resume tucked under her arm. Unsure if she'd make it. Unsure if it mattered. Malaya smiled faintly, remembering. Then she turned, picked up her notes, and headed back to her desk. There was still work to do, but now it mattered for more than just her. She hadn't come to just get a job. She had come to light the way. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.